We welcome you all to our second meeting of the year. This is the AAUW Oregon online branch meeting, our November meeting, and we thought that we would like to have a little fun after the elections. And considering the way it went, we really need a little fun. So we're here with Caitlin Bartlemay, and she's going to tell us all about a non-traditional career for women, and that is master distiller. So she's going to talk about how she got to be a master distiller in our very own state of Oregon. And then she's going to talk about her distillery and the products she makes and how we might include them in our holiday celebrations. So, Caitlin, take it away.
Well, again, I really do want to say, thank you so much for having me. It's a genuine pleasure to be with you tonight, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about the distillery and all the brandies that we make. So, I did promise I would talk about myself a little bit. So, it doesn't. It's probably closer to the least favorite side of my job, just talking about myself, because it is such an important thing to highlight that I'm just one person in a big team. But as far as how I got to be in the position that I am in, I promise not to bore, but I'm going to start way back at the beginning. My family owned a Century Wheat Ranch in Eastern Oregon. So I grew up as a farm kid. So my dad was blessed or cursed, however you want to put it, with two daughters. And my sister was never really interested in the farm side of things. And so that left it all to me. So I grew up being my dad's right-hand man. I was out in the field all day long, running equipment and driving before I was legally licensed, right? Because farm kid's gonna farm kid. And when you're a small family farm, everybody has to pull their weight and then some. And my parents never had the opportunity to finish college, and so that was definitely a goal that they had for their two kids. So they claimed to not care when I went to college for, but that I was going to go. I think if I'd have chosen something different than I did, they might have felt that they needed an opinion. However, I had fallen in love with food and food science because in high school, we actually got satellite internet and Food Network had just started. And so my parents were always a little confused as to why their tomboy farm kid loved watching Iron Chef Japan, dubbed over in English and everything. But I was always fascinated in food and how food works, and really, honestly, the chemistry of cooking. And so, lucky for me, Oregon State has a world-renowned food science department. And the important thing to note about Oregon State's food science department is that, unlike UC Davis, which also has an amazing program, Oregon State focuses on hands-on training. So not only are they making sure that their students go out and do internships before they graduate, in fact, they almost force you to take a term off to go and work in the industry you're interested in, but also as a part of all of your classes, you spend time in a real live pilot plant brewing beer, making wine, tasting beer, tasting wine. And I know it's funny to say, like, oh, I bet you it's really hard to get college students to drink beer and wine, but to be drinking it critically and thinking about this manufacturing in a very critical way, both the good parts, but also the faults. And to be honest, they did focus a lot more on the faults. So it wasn't good stuff that we were drinking, which definitely adds to it. So I have a degree in food science from Oregon State, and it was during my time at Oregon State that I was taking an introduction to beer, wine, and spirits class. And at this point in time, my parents had started a winery when I was in middle school because small farms needed to diversify. So not only was I driving tractor, I was crushing grapes and helping my dad manage fermentations and bottling, and also going out there and selling product. Interestingly enough, when you're under 21, you can't work behind a bar. I understand that, but at the tasting room at the farm, it was considered behind a bar. So I couldn't work in the tasting room that was next to our house, but I could be loaded up with cases of wine and sent off to Portland to do in-store tastings in Fred Meyer's. So I was the traveling wine salesperson. So even though I turn 37 tomorrow, I have more than 20 years of experience teaching adults how to drink alcohol. So in this intro to beer, wine, and spirits class, I was like, all right, well, I understand how wine works because I've been doing that for a while now. And I had a pretty good handle on how beer works. And then I was really surprised at how I didn't realize that I had this massive blank spot when it came to spirits. And in 2008, 2009, the kind of transparency that consumers enjoy and can expect on the internet and from all of these brands is not something that existed then. So there weren't all these like fan groups and hobby groups that are like were super interested in bourbon and brandy and whiskey and all these things. If you went to a website for a specific brand, it was kind of like, here's our spirit, you're welcome. There wasn't a lot of brand transparency, like what is it made from, what kind of technology are we using to do it, where are we sourcing our raw materials, all that kind of stuff. That was all just kind of a mystery. It was like, here's your bottle of bourbon, you're welcome. And I apparently don't react well when people withhold information from me. So I started trying to find any kind of resources, which really there wasn't a whole lot. And so the only option for me to learn more about it was to get a job in a distillery. And to this day, even though there are more and more programs, I know Oregon State actually has a master's program now for distilling, and so does Michigan. And there's certainly a couple of really wonderful programs in the EU and Scotland. It's still very much an apprenticeship style job. So if people that are interested in getting into distilling, like you can come at it from the schooling, from the education, from the training, but by and large, it's still made up of people that either come from other disciplines, so they kind of grow up in wine or beer and then make the transition, or they start at the ground floor and it really is an apprenticeship type job. So I sent a resume to every distillery in the greater Pacific Northwest, which was Northern California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, which is a pretty generous description of what most people would consider that to be the Pacific Northwest. And Clear Creek never told me to stop calling, essentially. And Clear Creek was where I would have preferred to work, but I would have worked anywhere because I was trying to get a job out of college in 2010 in my chosen career path. And that was, I mean, most people that are still graduating from college find it difficult to get a job in what they've studied for. So I was very, very blessed that Clear Creek put up with, and the founder of Clear Creek, Steve McCarthy, put up with my calling just about every Friday to see if they had time for me, if there was any questions that they had, and interestingly enough, he would answer the phone. And at one point he was like, I think I lost your resume. Would you mind resending it? And I was like, oh, absolutely. I'll happily resend it. So I sent another letter and I sent another email, and they hired me the day after my last final at Oregon State. And I started on the packaging line, and 6 months later, I was getting trained on how to run the stills. And a couple months after that, I had usurped control of the domestic shipping for all of our products across the country. And that included some export shipping as well. And gosh, I mean, 4 years of working for Steve McCarthy, the founder, and Steve was ready to retire. He then sold the company to Hood River Distillers, which now owns and still owns Clear Creek to this day. And in 2017, they moved us to Hood River. In 2020, I was named Head Distiller, and this last spring, I was named Master Distiller. So that is the long story long of how little old me became a Master Distiller of such an iconic brand such as Clear Creek Distillery. Any questions before I move on to talk about Clear Creek and Hood River Distillers? I love questions, by the way. Absolutely.
I have a question. Where was Clear Creek before you moved to Hood River?
So Clear Creek was founded in Northwest Portland. So we first started on 23rd and Quimby, which is currently the Matador Tequila Bar. And then in 2009, 2010, they moved to their second facility, which was 24th and Wilson, which is where I spent the first 7.5 years of my career there. And then now we're in the Heights in Hood River.
I have a question. And towards the end of your remarks, you were saying you were made this distiller, and then another level, a master distiller. I think. What does that mean? You were made?
Oh, sorry. I mean, promoted, bestowed upon, right.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I have never, uh, my job description throughout my entire career has always been very elusive. I just kind of, um, I'm apparently really bad at staying in my lane. And so far, nobody's gotten so angry at me that I've gotten in trouble, which means that I'm generally overworked. But that also means that I have gotten to learn a lot about all the different kinds of ways that this company manifests, from sales and marketing all the way down through compliance things, production, facilities management, all that kind of stuff. So when you're a super handy problem-solving farm kid from Eastern Oregon, turns out you're fairly capable at a lot of things.
Can you have any initials behind your name?
I do not. I have no alphabet initials behind my name. I just have a simple bachelor's degree in food science.
I find your story just pretty exciting. My husband has a master's in food science and other degrees,
Awesome.
but no, it's crazy. He was going for his what was it? Being a judge, a beer judge. He brews his own beer. Came and won the LA County Fair twice as the best home brewer.
Oh,
And
awesome.
came third in the state of California with a Dutch beer that was done in the 1600s, except the water was better.
Uh-huh.
And we also have our own little vineyard. We've got about, we have Sangiovese, Chardonnay, and also what's the other, Zinfandel grapes. You know, he does it all organically. But we're done with that. COVID was not kind to us. We went into the liquors, the brandies, and anything else during COVID.
Sure.
So I wanna thank you and your team for keeping us in shape.
It's funny that you bring up 2020. We actually, that's one of the cool things about being a part of a bigger company now, like HRD. We actually made 22,000 gallons of hand sanitizer in the very beginning of 2020. Yeah. And we sold it all at cost, and we actually contracted with Moda Health to provide that to all the healthcare providers and emergency service workers, so that we were getting enough money to keep paychecks coming, and to cover the cost of the materials, which was great. But also, because we were contracting it for emergency services, we were making sure that we were a behemoth in production, as we were in our area. We were making sure that we were still protecting the retail market for all the smaller distilleries in the area that that kept their lights on with that opportunity to sell retail hand sanitizer. So that was 2020 was hard on us all. Well, if there are any other questions about me, feel free to ask them later. But I'll talk a little bit more about Clear Creek, which is my favorite topic in the whole world. So Clear Creek Distillery was founded in 1985 by a man named Steve McCarthy in Portland, Oregon. The whole idea was to use the bounty of the Pacific Northwest and turn that into fruit brandies, liqueurs, and eventually an American single malt that would rival all of their European counterparts. He had actually traveled through Europe with a separate company and fallen in love with Williams Pear Brandy. And as it turns out, the Williams pear in the UK is exactly the same as the Bartlett pear here in the United States. And if people are curious about the history of that, feel free to ask me at the end. It's kind of, I think it's hilarious, but because it's the same pear, he was like, All right. Well, I have family here in the Hood River Valley that's still growing Bartlett pears. It can't be that hard to figure out how to make pear brandy. Famous last words. What wasn't that hard, he ended up starting the third craft distillery in the country. And I think what's interesting, not only were we the third craft distillery in the country, but all three of those distilleries were on the West Coast, and every single one of them were brandy distilleries. So it's interesting to me that is the first place that they went, just because brandy is really, when you're talking about distilling, it is a natural distillate. I know for Americans, everybody gets really high centered on bourbon being the spirit of the United States. That was actually an act of Congress in 1964. Apple brandy precedes production by early colonists before bourbon's discovery by about 150 years. So when you want to talk about what early colonists were distilling here in the United States, it was all fruit brandy. And in fact, Johnny Appleseed's trees were all cut down during Prohibition, except for one, because his apple trees weren't for apple pies and putting apples in lunch boxes, but it was to make cider, and cider turns into apple brandy. So brandy is a huge part of our drinking culture that has been lost by Prohibition. And so Steve set out to make pear brandy because he loved it. And if you're going to make pear brandy and live in the Pacific Northwest, you might as well make apple brandy and blue plum brandy and cherry brandy, also known as Kirschwasser, and then a bunch of other fruit liqueurs, because as we all know, pretty much everything grows in abundance here in Oregon. And so what started as an attempt to just make sure that he always had as much pear brandy as he could have, turned into a legacy Oregon brand. We actually turned 40 next year. And like I said at the beginning, Steve was ready to retire after having owned Clear Creek for 30 years and was looking for somebody to buy his company. And the most important thing in his mind was finding a company that would take good care of the employees, of which I was one. And he was more concerned about that over, maintaining any kind of legacy that he might have. And so when he started quietly looking around for someone to buy Clear Creek, he reached out to Hood River Distillers. And little did he know, they were actually looking towards the future and wanting to control a product or several products in their portfolio from raw material to finished product again. I don't know how familiar any of you are with the history of Hood River Distillers, but it was founded in 1934, just months after the end of Prohibition. So when it comes to their federal distilled spirits license, they are DSP, so Distilled Spirits Producer, OR for Oregon, 01. They are the first licensed distillery in Oregon in 1934. They started doing the same thing that Clear Creek does, which is making fruit brandy from all the bounty of the Hood River Valley. And during World War II, any distillery that had production capability were asked, maybe not as kindly as one might hope, but asked nevertheless by the U.S. government to create industrial alcohol for the production of rubber and gunpowder. And so Hood River Distillers changed gears and became an industrial alcohol provider during the war. And on the other side of the war, when returning back to brandy distillation, Americans had that was kind of where Americans turned away from brandy. And in large part, brandy kind of got redefined on the other side of Prohibition as well. Americans started consuming clearer spirits. Vodka and gin really took off on the other side of the war. And even whiskeys were languishing. So by the late 50s, the original founders sold the company to three business owning families in the Hood River Valley, and the descendants of those families still own it to this day. By the early 60s, they had to change gears and stopped fermenting and distilling and became what's now known as a rectifier or a blending house. So they're buying spirits from all over the world and then bringing them to Hood River and blending them and packaging them into new brands and new products. And so in purchasing Clear Creek in 2014, it was an opportunity for them to return back to their roots, making, fruit brandy from the Hood River Valley, but also, like I said, controlling a number number of products that they make in their portfolio, from raw material all the way to finished good. Since the acquisition of Clear Creek Distillery, we've added several other independent brands that are made by the team and I that come out of Clear Creek Distillery, but continue to live on in their own brand world. And then McCarthy's, which is actually the first American Single Malt, which was first distilled by Clear Creek in 1994, first released in 1998, making it the first single malt that is also starting to be treated a little bit more like an independent brand, because when you have a full line of fruit brandies and liqueurs, and then you're like, oh, by the way, we also have this smoky peaty American Single Malt, it's a little incongruous with the whole lineup. And so while the story of McCarthy's and Clear Creek are very important to each other, sometimes Clear Creek goes to events and we do speaking engagements about Clear Creek where we maybe don't mention McCarthy's as much, and vice versa. The same with McCarthy's, excluding Clear Creek. So that's kind of the overarching brand story behind Clear Creek and also Hood River Distillers. And we still process over 1 million pounds of Pacific Northwest fruit into fruit brandies and liqueurs every year. And we're producing McCarthy's in 4 different items right now. The original flagship is a 3-year McCarthy's. The McCarthy's, all of them are made from peat malted barley that we import from Scotland. We work with a local brewery partner, which right now is Double Mountain, and we've been working with them for about 8 or 9 years at the moment. And they brew the beer for us. So the whiskey starts as grain and then beer, and then that beer is distilled and then aged in oak barrels. And then once it's aged, you take it back out and you proof it down to your bottle strength and then bottle it. So Double Mountain brews the beer for us, and we distill it and age it in 100% Oregon oak casks for 3 or 6 years. So we have a 3, a 6, and then we have 2 sherry cask finishes of our McCarthy's, an Oloroso sherry cask finish and a Pedro Jimenez sherry cask finish. And then we're making a couple different vodkas and a couple different apple brandies, and we just launched the Graf Amaro and Aperitivo at the beginning of this year. So we're pretty busy kids. Hood River Distillers in total, we're employing like 60, 65 people, from office staff, production staff, all the way through the sales team. And Clear Creek Distillery's production team is 3 of those 65 people.
So what does it mean to be a distiller?
Huh?
What does it mean to be a distiller?
Well, a distiller is usually, it's like if you were to see a job description for distiller, you could also describe that as being a machine operator. So a distiller is going to be the person that's coming in and running the stills. In a bigger outfit, that literally would mean you're coming in and just running the stills. In a small outfit like Clear Creek, it's pretty much production associate is what distiller would mean to us. So you're handling fruit, you're going to be mashing it, fermenting it, doing quality checks on it, cleaning tanks, cleaning hoses. It's a lot of cleaning. It's mostly cleaning. To be honest, to be a distiller, it's like 40% cleaning, 35% paperwork, and the rest is actually distilling. Right? Most jobs are just cleaning and paperwork. Distilling isn't any different. But yeah, in bigger outfits, they would have teams that are just doing the brewing and the fermenting, and then you have your teams that are your distillers, actually turning the raw material into distillate. And then you would also have a warehouse team that would take that distillate, bring it to barrel strength, put it into barrels, and then you would have a blending team that's tasting the stuff before it goes into the barrels, tasting it when it comes out of the barrels, and deciding which barrels to pick to blend together to make each bottling of whiskey.
So as the master distiller, you oversee it all.
Yeah. So master distiller could also be used as a management term. So I could be a production manager or operations manager, same thing as master distiller. I think the more interesting part of my job that's maybe a little bit different than just being an ops manager, as far as what people's assumption is that is this kind of public piece, right? I'm not just running a still. I'm not just doing facilities management stuff, managing, making sure we have all the raw materials when we need them and we're not running out of things. But I'm also the keeper of the history and culture of the company. And I spend time out in market with the sales and marketing team. And in fact, I actually have to wake up at 3:00 in the morning to get a 7:00 flight to Texas tomorrow, because I'm spending the rest of the week down in Houston working with our Texas sales team for before the holidays. So I am I'm the last of the crew that had worked for Steve McCarthy, and being in the position that I'm in, I am the keeper of the lore of the history, and it's my job to not only share our hard work with with consumers, with the public, but it's also my job to share that culture and those stories with new incoming members of the team, so that we don't forget the reason for the passion and the reason we're doing what we're doing.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned size, and you have 60 some employees, and then you mentioned big companies. How big is big? Because your operation sounds pretty big.
Yeah, it does sound like it sounds big, right? It's not just two people in a storage unit with a hope and a dream. But when it comes to spirits, granted, depending on your operation and your equipment, 60 people could be massive. The majority of our people are on the bottling, are at the bottling plant for Hood River Distillers. So while Clear Creek processes over 1 million pounds of fruit, that's just 3 people. And so Hood River Distillers is bottling millions of cases of alcohol a year. And so it takes quite a bit of people to run those bottling lines. And so the bulk of the business is still packaging and running all those other things. So, but yeah, when you talk about, scale, it is really incredible to think like we are hilariously small when it comes to like the big producers across the country. Like, it takes Clear Creek 2 weeks to distill 15, 16 barrels of whiskey. And there are outfits that are considered medium small that are coming online in the next year that are built to produce 160 barrels a day. And that's considered like small in the scheme of whiskey. So, yeah, it's an incredible amount of consumption, and an ungodly amount of volume that some of these larger outfits put through.
So would you be considered a craft producer?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. We are craft. We are members of the American Craft Spirits Association. There is still some, and the craft and the old guard within the craft producers. There's still some jockeying and some politics in that. I know in some people's opinion, they don't want to consider Clear Creek Craft anymore because we're owned by Hood River Distillers. But like I said, Hood River Distillers is still a really small company. And so I think it would be a little bit different if somebody like Brown-Forman or Diageo or Constellation or Remy Martin had bought Clear Creek. I think I would understand being no longer included at the fun table. But realistically, like HRD is still a really small company, and Clear Creek is still a subsidiary of that. So while our employee size and our bottling throughput is much bigger, Clear Creek still really hasn't changed that much as far as our ethos and what we're doing and what we're pumping out. So definitely craft. And when it comes to the mindset of craft, absolutely. And as far as the politics of craft, there are distilleries that are still independently owned and still considered craft. And yet they're pumping out, hundreds of thousands of proof gallons of gallons of alcohol a year, and continue to raise that ceiling so that they can still be considered craft, even though they outstrip most craft distilleries production, hundreds of times over. So it's just up to individual perspective, I guess.
How widely distributed are you within Oregon itself?
So that's the awesome thing about Oregon. We are a control state. And so all of our products are accepted as regular order items within Oregon. And so it's up to each individual Oregon liquor store, each agent, what they choose to put on their shelves, because I'm sure you guys have all been into a liquor store and they're always jam packed with bottles and there's no room for any more, right? So they're trying to keep those shelves as full as possible with all the different options available. But at the end of the day, they want to stock whatever you want to buy. And our stuff is readily orderable. So the cool thing about Oregon is, one, the price is the same, whether you're buying something in Portland or you're buying something down in Southern Oregon or Eastern Oregon. Our pear brandy is the same price in LeGrand that it is in Ashland, which is awesome. But the other cool thing is, if you are in Ashland or LeGrand and you want our pear brandy and they don't have it, you could say, hey, I would love to buy bottles of the Clear Creek pear brandy. And most liquor stores get a shipment at least once every 2 weeks, if not a couple times a week. And so they can put that on the next order, and you're not obligated to buy the whole case. You're not even technically obligated to buy the bottle, but your liquor store wants to stock things that you are interested in and that you want to purchase. So all of our stuff is available in Oregon. And so if it's not being stocked on the shelf in your store, all you have to do is ask. And the turnaround time is pretty quick.
How about Montana? Do you send it out here?
So Hood River Distillers has products in Montana, because you guys are a control state as well. I'm not entirely sure how much Clear Creek you have in Montana. I will say I'm not sure about the shipping rules, but we do have some direct to consumer shipping now through our website. So not all of our products are listed on there, but a lot of our flagship products are. So if you want to check on our website, it's www.hrdspirits.com, and type in your address, put something in the cart, type in your address and see if it'll ship to you. So that's also an alternative. And the shipping is not half bad. It's $20 flat rate shipping for 1 or 6 bottles.
And I'm having a lot of fun. I have my list in my cart already because I'm shopping as you're talking. Okay, I'm getting my holiday shopping all done. I do have a question, and that is about McCarthy's Oregon Single Malt. The 6-year, there's something behind the 6-year. It says PX. What does the PX stand for?
So PX stands for Pedro Jimenez, and Pedro Jimenez is the name of a Spanish grape. That Spanish grape is picked and fermented into a sherry, and that sherry tends to be like on the sweeter and dried fruit side of sherries versus something like Oloroso sherry, which is going to be more oxidative and like fall flavors. And so we have gotten barrels that previously held Pedro Jimenez sherry but they've been emptied. We put our whiskey into it for like 6 or 8 months, and we, tasted it fairly regularly to check in on it. And then once the whiskey told us it was ready, we pulled that whiskey out. So that's how you finish a whiskey, but that's what Pedro Jimenez is.
Oh, thank you, because I've just added it now. And the other one I'm interested, I can't get it down here in LA. The closest shop is Total Wine in Laguna. And I live right next to a Total Wine in Glendale. So it would be a matter of calling them. But I want to get a connection with you guys, so I'm ordering it online. And also the Douglas fir. I was in Germany where a woman actually made her own, I think it was an evergreen of some sort, brandy that was out of sight. Because mostly you look at it and you think, what? It's a totally different taste. So I cannot wait to try this.
Yeah, we make our, like I said, right, we make all these products to rival their European counterparts. When it comes to the Douglas fir, there is a European version sort of it. It's called Eau de vie de bourgeon de sapin, but it's made from pine needles. And we make ours from the Douglas fir bud because we're from Oregon. And it's, our love letter to the Pacific Northwest. We go up to the Hood River or the Mount Hood Forest. We work with the Hood River Forest Service, and they manage some 80,000 acres of forest all around the mountain. And and it's an organic tree, or it's an organic tree farm, but it's a wood farm. And so it's an 85-year harvest cycle. And we pay them a foraging fee, and then they give us a map and they say, pick here. Now, they were really worried when they first started working with us. And so they told us that they were going to move us every year. I don't think they've ever gone up there and been able to tell where we've picked and where we haven't. So we've picked at the same place every time, but I do make sure that I ask, where they would like us to pick every year, just in case they decide to change it. We're fairly lazy when it comes to harvesting Doug fir buds, so we're just picking alongside the bike trails that are throughout that whole forest. And for those of you that don't know, the Doug fir bud represents the only growth that tree is going to have. So they haven't had to trim any of those bike trails for a while, because we've essentially been picking all of the growth that those trees would have along those trails for like the last 8 years. So I think it's mutually beneficial, at least for that small area that we pick. But we're only picking about 100 pounds, but it is a lot of fun to play with. For cocktails, I like to use it as a sub for an absinthe rinse, especially because a lot of times absinthe with that aniseed flavor is a little bit of a polarizing flavor. It also works really well in any gin cocktail. So if you're doing a split base Vesper with vodka and gin, split up some of that gin to include a little bit of Doug fir is amazing. And then one of the vodkas that we make, which is an independent brand called Timberline, it's made from 14 different varieties of Pacific Northwest apple and grain, and that makes the Timberline vodka with the Douglas fir and a little bit of maple syrup makes a really good firtini, is what we call it. Oh, I did promise recipes. Okay, so recipes. Unless there's any other questions, but I do have some.
Branda has had her hand up. Branda?
Oh, yes.
Do you have a lot of women that go into this field, or are you an only one?
I'm not the only one, thank goodness. There have been lots of women in distilling, but they're never highlighted, and it is definitely still male dominated. So there have been really noteworthy women throughout the last couple hundred years of distilling, when you include European distilleries as well. They just don't necessarily get talked about, or haven't been talked about until very recently. But there are growing numbers of women. I'm actually, so I'm a Pink Boots member. Pink Boots is a not-for-profit that is an international not-for-profit that is built to support, grow, educate, and connect females and female identifying people in the fermentation industry. So if you make at least 25% of your income from fermentation, come and hang out with the Pink Boots kids. It started out as just women in brewing, and then they opened it up to everybody in 2020. I've been a part of the leadership for the Portland chapter for a time. I'm on hiatus from leadership at the moment, but I'm still a chapter member. And that's around the world. So there's chapters, we were able to check in with our Ukrainian sisters when the war broke out and provide support to them. And there's a bunch of really awesome scholarships for, small things so that you can go to events, or even just get your Pink Boots membership paid for, all the way up to, there's some 6 weeks European training classes that we send a few people to every year. So I'm a Pink Boots member. I'm also a Women of the Vines and Spirit member, which is definitely more skewed towards like C-suite and management training within spirits. And then the last one, I am a board member for the Spirited Women's Collective, which is definitely more support and connection for people from like just starting out or thinking about distilling, all the way up to those of us that are acting in a little bit more of a mentorship role in a part of that. Oh, and speaking of mentorship, I'm a mentor in the Our Whiskey Foundation, which was founded by Becky Paskin. It's definitely more European centric, but there's actually quite a few people that are both mentors and mentees across the United States as well. So there is a growing number of women in distilling, and when it comes to the culture of distilling, by and large, the problems that I have had are from vendors and from consumers, and people having a problem with my gender. Most of the people, certainly, within production, if you show up and do the work, nobody cares. So it's for a male dominated industry, it's pretty inclusive on that front. At least that's been my experience so far. And I've definitely heard that from others, but I think when it comes to leadership roles and total participation, it's definitely less than 10% total across the industry, but it is growing, because those of us that have made it into positions where I am, we're not pulling up the ladder. We're doing everything that we can so that the women that come up up behind us don't have to fight as hard as we did to find information, to make those connections, to build our personal brands, but also build our network within the industry.
Thank you.
And you know what? I would really like to invite you, Caitlin, to join AAUW and join our online branch. It's very convenient that we meet online.
Yeah, that's great, because I live in the Dells, which is a long ways away from just about anywhere.
So I would really like you to consider joining AAUW and join AAU. When you join AAUW, you join the national, the state, and a local branch. And we're the local branch. We cover all of Oregon. So it would be AAUW of Oregon, and AAUW Oregon Online. So
I will absolutely look into that.
Yeah,
Okay, so I've got some recipes for drinking, but I also have some recipes for cooking, because definitely, I don't know about you guys, but I'm dusting off my recipe book and pulling out all the stops when it comes to cooking this time of year. And there are a lot of really great applications for a bunch of our products, not only in your cocktail glass, but also in some of the things that you're cooking in the kitchen. So we'll talk about cocktails first. With the pear brandy and all the brandies, a brandy sidecar, which you can look up the recipe online, is definitely a go-to. It's essentially like it's kind of like a lemon drop martini, but instead of using vodka, you're using pear brandy.
I like that.
A lot of times, and actually when I'm out and working with the sales team, you can sub pear brandy for silver tequila in a lot of craft tequila cocktails, and it works really, really well. So definitely don't be shy when you're messing around with pear brandy. It's more versatile than people think. I, of course, mostly drink it neat out of the freezer, because Steve trained me to be a purist. So it's always good as an after dinner digestif. An ounce out of the freezer after dinner settles the tummy. When it comes to the blue plum brandy, I love it in a daiquiri. I think a blue plum daiquiri is one of the best and easiest cocktails you can ever make. It's all you do is swap out the rum for the blue plum brandy. So it's lime juice, simple syrup, and plum brandy. It's amazing. Also, if you're making your mulled apple cider for the holidays, right? Put some spices in your apple cider, pinch of salt, pinch of sugar, a little bit of acid, some like cardamom and cinnamon sticks, ginger and clove, standard spiced apple cider. You can put the blue plum is actually really good in that. So we have some apple brandies and also the pear brandy, which lean themselves into that recipe really well. But I encourage you to try the blue plum in it, because I actually like it a lot better than even the apple brandy and a spiced apple cider. And then we get to the Kirschwasser, which is the cherry brandy. Interestingly enough, the flavor of the Kirschwasser isn't really cherry at all. We ferment and traditionally, and we do it traditionally. It's fermented and distilled on the pits of the cherry. So actually, the predominant flavor and aroma of the Kirschwasser is actually kind of like almonds and marzipan. It's very nutty and kind of buttery as well, which means that a lot of times you'll see some traditional fondue recipes that will call for Kirschwasser or cherry brandy. And that's why. It's because of that nutty flavor. And so you'll also see that brandy show up in a lot of baked good recipes, spritzed on the inside of croissants, included in Black Forest cake recipes or other chocolate cake and cookie recipes. It's a really important ingredient, but it's more like marzipan and almonds than it is of cherries. There's a little bit of like fresh red fruit to it, but most people that would drink it wouldn't be like, nah, that's cherry that I'm tasting. So that one's a lot of fun. And then the whiskey is really great in things like penicillins and whiskey sours and all that kind of stuff. It is a peated whiskey, but it's not an overwhelming peated whiskey. So it's definitely something that if you like whiskey at all, it's a lot of fun. But I actually, at this point in time, I've been with Clear Creek for over 14 years, and I spend more time cooking with everything that we make than drinking it. So if you have any recipes where you're needing to deglaze a pan, so let's say that you were frying up a couple steaks with maybe some shallots and mushrooms in the pan with it. You could throw those in once the steaks are cooked. Throw your shallots and onions and everything, or shallots and mushrooms in, and then throw in some apple brandy to deglaze the pan. It gets all of that those yummy caramelized bits on the bottom of the pan, and it lifts them up and into the food and makes this kind of like quick sauce and gravy with all of your herbs and everything afterwards. And you pour that over your steak. It's super good. I have basted whole roasted duck with pear brandy and butter before. That's a really good one. And then I actually brought a couple recipes that I've written them down, but they are, you'll notice, envelopes because farm kid's gonna farm kid. So one, how many of you are familiar with an old school grasshopper pie? I love you guys. You guys are the best. Okay, so the grasshopper pie is whole milk or cream, whole milk, and marshmallows as a base, and you melt the marshmallows into the cream, and then once it cools, you put your creme de menthe in there, and then you're folding in your whipped cream and put it in a graham cracker crust and freeze it. It doesn't have to be mint, which is super fun. So I've made it two ways. I made it with the Douglas fir brandy, and then topped it with a chocolate drizzle and use the regular graham cracker crust, throw it in the freezer. It's awesome. But I've also used it with McCarthy's. So I've added the McCarthy's. It's really smoky. It's delicious. And then instead of and then I add like a pinch of salt to it to kind of help with that savory note. And it's actually really, really good. That smokiness, the minerality of the whiskey and the saltiness plays actually really well with it, especially with a super dark chocolate drizzle. So those are two fun ones. Play around with your grasshopper pie recipe. Yeah, it doesn't have to be mint. You can put pretty much whatever spirit in place of the creme de menthe in that recipe. And then it's just a fun freezer pie that's all kinds of flavors, right? And then the other one is also for McCarthy's that I have written down, but it's McCarthy's molasses cookies. And I will, so I am traveling this week, so I am a horrible monster, but
okay, Caitlin, if you take a picture of those recipes and
I'll text it to you.
Send them.
Perfect.
We send them to Georgia and she'll send them to me. I will type them up and include them with the recording when I post it up to YouTube.
That was amazing. I was like, oh crap, I don't have time to email these.
No, just take pictures
because I need to go to bed as soon as I leave.
Yeah.
You're one of us. That's the way we work.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, I will take pictures of these and send them over to Georgia. That's amazing. But yeah, these are just like a really kind of a chewy ginger cookie, a ginger molasses cookie. But I changed all I changed the rest, and this is where my food science comes out because I can't be bothered to use regular recipes. I always have to change them and make them better because they're almost always wrong. So yeah, I changed all the ingredients to accommodate a pretty healthy quarter cup pour of McCarthy's in that cookie so that they still come together really nice. But they started as an experimental cookie and have now become a staple for all the Christmas cookies that I make.
I want that.
Yeah, really good.
Take the picture tonight, send it to Georgia tonight.
No, I will get it to Georgia tonight. I promise.
Thank you.
You're
going to talk about the apples, the British apples and our apples.
Oh, the pears. Do we want to know about
pears?
The short history of Bartlett pears?
Bartlett pears, yeah. Okay. And Williams pears.
Okay, so interestingly enough, we're all fairly used to the foods that we made being, bred and crossbred and picked over the centuries to be better and better, right? Most of our green vegetables all come from kale and Brussels sprouts or whatever, so it's over time and selective breeding. We have all of these wonderful fruits and vegetables. And we've also been through selective breeding, apples that produce better and, pear trees that withstand pests and pear trees that withstand disease and everything like that. So, and that's where we've got all this wonderful food that grows really well and provides us with enough food to feed all of the billions of people that we have on the earth. Awesome. Interestingly enough, Bartlett pears, as far as I can tell, have been Bartlett pears for hundreds of years. Like they're not a recent cross with something else and like this thing and the other thing. Like Bartlett pears are just Bartlett pears. So when you go back, we're looking at like, I think it's the 1400s. Don't quote me on the dates. I'm terrible at the dates, but there's two stories. I kind of like the Italian one better. So the Italian one is there's mostly because pears come from like the Turkey kind of area, kind of where apples came from as well, and they likely also came from China, kind of through all there. So really, realistically, as far as we know about the movement of various fruits across the world throughout history, the Italian one makes more sense than the British one. And also, for a fun side note, the Romans were actually grafting fruit trees. So I can't tell you that the Bartlett pear has been around since Roman times, but almost certainly the Romans were a part of getting the Bartlett pear to Italy in the first place, because they were grafting fruit trees like 200 years before the birth of Christ, which is awesome because they were doing super cool stuff. So anyways, fast forward, I can't remember which king it is, but there was an ailing king of France, and this Christian monk from Italy was brought in to help heal him, and he brought some of these pears. The king died because, of course, he did. But the pears were planted, and they were called the good Christian pears, right? Because this really nice vegan Christian monk came from Italy in order to save the king. They eventually made their way to the UK, and then they were discovered again, and they were called shoot, now I teased you guys the story, and then I'm going to forget all the details because it's getting late. An aldermaston. So then they were discovered in an aldermaston's yard. So then they were called the aldermaston pear. And then a nurseryman in the UK got a hold of them, and then he's the one that changed their name to Williams pear and started selling them like hotcakes as the Williams pear across the UK. Right. And then times move forward. The colonists go to the United States. The Williams pear seedlings go with, and they get planted on this colonist property in the United States. That property gets sold to a man named Enoch Bartlett. And Enoch Bartlett is wandering around his property, and he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Look at these pears I discovered. Nobody's ever had these pears before. You know what? I'll name them after myself. And so he names them Bartlett pears. And then these Bartlett pears go gangbusters all throughout the colonists. And all the Brits are like, all right, they seem pretty worked up about these Bartlett pears. We should probably get some of those trees back here. So they take some cuttings and grafts, and they bring the trees back to the UK and plant them. And then several years later, because it takes 3 or 4 years for fruit-bearing trees to start bearing fruit, the pears start growing. And they're like, those bastards, it's the same pear. So it is the same pear. It is the Williams pear in the UK is the same as the Bartlett pear over here. The names have stuck, but the Williams pear brandy that you get over in the EU is the same as the Bartlett pear brandy that you get here in the States. I think it's hilarious that all of these men discovered it and then immediately named it after themselves, because of course they did.
And I love that the UK, the people from the UK took it back to the UK.
It's just I find a lot of personal joy in that story.
The colonists can't have this. We want it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
We'll let them have the tea, for God's sake.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about all the products that we make? We make a whole bunch of fruit liqueurs. They're dead simple. They're just we buy local wine, we distill it into a neutral wine brandy, and then we put as much physical fruit as will go into that liquid. I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but everything that Clear Creek makes, the raw materials come from within 200 miles of the distillery. So, and the only reason it's that far is because the cranberries come from the coast, and the coast is an awful long ways from Hood River. But we put all the fruit in the brandy, and then it steeps for 6 months to a year. We press the fruit off, and we back sweeten it with a little bit of beet sugar, and that's it. So we make 7 of those, but I actually sneak a little bit of our Marionberry liqueur in my Marionberry pies. So I add just a little bit. The simple way to do it is adding just a little bit of extra flour to tighten up your pie. I like to add a little bit of tapioca flour instead of extra flour, because tapioca flour is a little bit sweeter, and it doesn't taste like as cakey as the flour can be. But yeah, I put a healthy amount of the Marionberry liqueur in my Marionberry pies. But I've put cherry liqueur in my cherry pies. yeah, this sky's the limit with those. But for the liqueurs, they're great in a little bit of club soda. You can mix them with a little bit of vodka and you could have a pear martini. You could have a raspberry martini. You could have a loganberry martini, right? Or my mom loves playing around with them with mules. So ginger beer, a little bit of vodka, and any one of the liqueurs with some crushed ice. So those liqueurs are actually really versatile too. And the best margarita you'll ever have is made with our cranberry liqueur.
I have a question about, I was digging around in the back of our liquor cabinet and probably found some Kirschwasser that's probably 20 or 30 years old. How long can you keep that?
If it's brandy and that's got a good closure forever, usually over time spirits might start to, especially with older packaging, you'll start to lose brandy and you'll lose volume and the proof will drop and eventually it'll go cloudy. It's not necessarily, well, I mean, it could go bad if it loses all of its alcohol and then it's just kind of moldy water in the bottom. But if it's clear and it still smells fine, then it's going to be fine. I mean, it starts as 80 proof or higher alcohol. So as long as you store your alcohol in a cool, dry place. So I hope none of you guys are storing your wine or your spirits on top of your refrigerators because that's a big no-no. And also out of windows where the sun can affect it because the sun will actually change the flavor in your bottles, whether it's wine, beer, or spirits. Then it should be fine. Okay. I think, to be honest, the most problems that we've had over the years with our clear spirits is likely due to crafty teenagers.
Diluting a little.
Yeah.
Gotta have a sip.
Mm-hmm. And then with liqueurs, we recommend that people consume them within a year of opening them. They're dark in color because there's so much fruit material that's dissolved into the spirit, so they will start to oxidize over time. They don't go bad. They won't be a vibrant red. They'll start to turn a little bit of a muddier brownish kind of red, and they'll change from tasting like bright fresh fruit to a little bit more like cooked jam and cooked fruit.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. This has been absolutely wonderful and informative and delightful.
Well,
and
I thank you so much for having me on. If you guys have any other questions, Georgia has my contact information, my email. She is welcome to share that with all of you. So if you have any questions, whether it's about something that I talked about this evening or just spirits in general, I am absolutely happy to answer those questions. And then for those of you that Instagram, my own Instagram handle is the Bartlemay. And then I also run the brand accounts for Clear Creek Distillery, McCarthy's American Single Malt, and Trails and Bourbon.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies. It's been a pleasure.